Yes.
Joy texted me. She said that you're not online.
Okay, I think we should be good. Yeah, thank you. All right. Okay, so we've got you guys here this morning. We've got Joy joining us online. So not here in person, but here in person somewhere else. All right. And we are picking up the story of the conversion of Saul to the Apostle Paul. And we've already seen, we're reading the book of Acts. We are in, let me just jump here. We are in the 10th chapter. We're in the 10th chapter. We have already been through the conversion experience of Saul. I'm sorry, we're not on Paul. We're on Peter. So we've seen the conversion of Paul. Now the story is moving to Peter. Peter has had Peter had a visitation from an angel telling him that a man named Cornelius is going to try to contact him and that God wants him to have a meeting with Cornelius. Cornelius has had a vision or visitation from an angel, vice versa, that he is someone who God has seen and heard. God is grateful and seen his worship and his care of people in need, and that God wants him to meet Peter. So both of the men, I need to get it right. I think Peter has the vision and Cornelius has the angel visitation. Both are ways that God is talking to them that they need to meet one another. And so we're just now getting to the place where they finally have met one another. It is Cornelius and his household, and they've both gone through, or at least Peter has gone through, a process of needing a little bit of convincing that Cornelius is somebody that God really does want to meet with, because Cornelius is a Gentile, and because Peter is Jewish. He's not used to going to somebody's house and mingling, and God has shown him in a very graphic way through this vision of animals being let down in a blanket before him. All animals that would be considered unclean to the Jewish person, and the voice of God says, kill and eat. And Peter has a little argument with God, but ends up realizing God really does want him to do something differently than what God has told people to do in the past. And so that's what he has in mind as he's going to meet Cornelius. This looks to be like a strong metaphor, a symbol to let Peter know that God is considering people who are outside of the chosen people of Israel to also be the chosen people of God, to also be clean, to also be part of God's people. And up until this point, that really was not something that God was telling the people of Israel. God was keeping them isolated from everybody else. All throughout the scriptures, you'll find all kinds of different ways that God is telling the Jewish people that they are different from everybody else. You're special, you're chosen, you're unique, you are mine. And the mentality of people for generations before this is that there are other people that are really not God's people, and we, the Jews, are God's people. there's also some change in their perceptions of other people have other gods and we have our God. So it is almost like a competition of whose God is stronger, whose God is better. This is kind of like in grade school, my dad can beat up your dad. It's kind of that kind of thing. Later on, we see the prophets telling the Jewish people, actually God, our God, Yahweh, the God who spoke to Moses and has been speaking to us for thousands of years, our God is the God over all gods and over everybody in a way. And we're just a special group. So that perspective has kind of grown and changed. But it has never got to this point where Peter is hearing from God that those people that are not us are also clean. They are also acceptable to me. They are also in relationship and in covenant with me. And so now we're getting to the place where Peter is sitting down with Cornelius. He's accepted that God is trying to do something new and different. And now he's sharing the good news of what God is up to in this world. And so we're starting in, let's see where's a good place to kind of pick up. Okay, so we're going to start in verse 34. All right, so in verse 34 here, Peter fairly exploded with his good news. It's God's own truth. Nothing could be plainer. God plays no favorites. Now that's not such a big deal for us to hear, but for Peter to hear, that is the opposite of what the Jewish people have been hearing their generation after generation. Every generation hears the opposite of that. God does play favorites, and you are God's favorite. We are God's favorites is what we're hearing. So the word that is used in the New Revised Standard Version is partiality. God plays no partiality. And again, what the Jews were hearing generation after generation, God does play partiality. God does take one side over another. So this is a new message. This is a big part, a major part of the good news that's being shared. It makes no difference who you are or where you're from. If you want God and are ready to do as he says, the door is open. I'm going to pick up, this is Acts 10. This is one of those, this is one of those chapters and verses that is really worth looking at both translations. And we did this at the end of our time together a couple weeks ago, but I think it's worth looking at again. All right, so we're in 34. All right, get a little bigger. All right, so here's the thing. God plays no favorites, or another way to put it, God shows no partiality. And then if you look at 35 that we just read, in every people, anyone who fears him and practices righteousness is acceptable to him. So when we see this phrase, every people, this is like the word nations or tribes, any group of people. So in every people, so every group of people, within any group of people, whether it's Jewish or other groups, anyone who fears God, and we talked about that word fear last time that we met. This is not just, I'm afraid of my abusive father. This is not what fear, that type of fear. This is a being in awe and being overwhelmed by the glory and the wonder of who God is, and this is deep respect. But this is also, we see, is always connected with love. All right. So this would be like a good, healthy relationship between parent and child. There's respect going both ways. There is an awe, because if you're a child, your parent has been on this earth for a while and you're new, so you're looking for guidance. You're trying to figure things out, so this is...
Excuse me, Bud. In this day and age, those of us, all of us who are reading the Bible, don't know that. They don't know that word doesn't mean fear. For generations, that's been different.
Right.
Yeah,
It's been, we have been told, be terrified of God. That's what we've been told. And we've often had religious leaders or teachers to tell us that you better watch out. This is almost like, this is like the song that we sing for Santa Claus. You better watch out, you better not cry, you better not shout, I'm telling you why. So there's this idea of you need to be afraid as a child in order to grow up the way you're supposed to. So that way of thinking, because we're reliant for generations on the symbolism, the analogy of our relationship to God being similar to a child and a parent relationship, we've used the way that our culture has parented as an example of the way God parents us. And that's actually backwards. We should be looking at the way God relates to us as an example of how we should do what we do as people, right? So fortunately, I think that has evolved over time. I think that's less of an attitude that we see today. We don't see that tactic used with children so much, the fear. There are complaints that's had a negative impact and has made children today too familiar with authority and disrespectful of people that are older and wiser, and things like that. So, the pendulum swings. You're terrified of your parents, or you treat your parents like they're your friends. But there is a healthy, there's a good, positive, healthy place somewhere there in the middle, right? I do think that children should respect their parents, and I also think that parents should respect their children. So, for example, when you're teaching your child something, Suli and I talked about this recently, when you're teaching your child the proper way to relate to one another in a respectful way, you may teach your child, if you're going to come into our bedroom and the door is shut, knock on the door and wait for somebody to answer and say, come in, right? So you can have that as a guideline, but it would be confusing if you then tell the child, I can come into your room whenever I want. And if you have the door shut, I'm your parent. I deserve to come in whenever I want. I don't have to knock. So there is this tricky balance as parents and children where you're letting them know there is a mutuality that we have. We respect one another mutually. But you also let them know at the end of the day, I have been here longer. I am providing a roof over your head and food for you to eat. I, like the show, Father Knows Best, So I know better because of that. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that we teach our children how to say sorry when they make mistakes, but then we don't show them an example if we make a mistake that we also say, I'm sorry, right? So what we're looking for today for a healthy relationship between parent and child is...
But I'm in the middle of a mess of a muddle right now. I have a granddaughter that's coming with me to the funeral. She's put on a great deal of weight. The last thing her mother said to me last week on the phone, don't anybody mention her weight because it'll embarrass her. And I'm saying, good, let her be embarrassed. Maybe it'll help, you know. And
Right.
my Peter called me this morning for some other reason. And he said, I'm very, very angry with you, Mom. It's my family, and you don't interfere.
Right.
And I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. Not that I'm going to, I promised her I wouldn't say, so I won't say.
Right.
But am I right or wrong? How do you know?
Well, I think the way that you know is by having a conversation and figuring it out between you. Because as families grow, our roles evolve, right? So if I'm a parent and I have a child and my child is an infant, they're completely and totally dependent on me. I am responsible to keep that child alive. But then there comes a point where at some point the child needs to be independent and needs to be able to function on this earth without me, because at some point I will be gone and the child will be left on their own, right? So there's this gradual process, and then there is a reversal of roles as time goes on, where you were once holding your child and the child was in diapers. Later on, the parent may be in diapers and be completely and totally dependent on the child, just a complete reversal of the other. And there comes a point where and everybody ages differently, but in general, we all will get to a point where we're completely dependent on the people around us to continue to live. And so as those roles change, then the boundaries change, the expectations change. And every family is a little bit different. Now, generationally, parenting does change from one generation to another. And I think before, in generations past, it was okay to use shame as a motivator to get children to do what they're supposed to do, something that's good for them. So if you think about kind of the classic classroom scenario, where a student who breaks the rules might be sat in the corner of a classroom and they have a dunce hat put on their head, and the stupid student sits in the corner because they're not doing what they're told. And so shame is used as a motivator for that student. If they want to be a part of the group, they need to change their behavior. So what we have discovered over time is that there comes a point where shame ends up becoming not a positive motivator, but ends up becoming something that makes it more difficult for a child to achieve the goals that you're trying to set out for them. One of the complaints about current generations of parents is that there's a term that they use called helicopter parenting. All right, and you can imagine what that is. The parent just hovers over the child and takes care of everything for them. And before, we used to be afraid. Do you remember the phrase, "Sticks and stones break my bones, but words will never hurt me"? Well, today, that has almost been reversed to where we say, we believe that words hurt worse than sticks and stones. And so now we're saying you need to protect the feelings of the children more so than you even protect them from physical harm or danger. And so this is the pendulum swinging. Because previous generations felt like too much shame was used, too many feelings were damaged, and children ended up carrying that with them for their whole lives. So instead of the shame helping them to get to a better place, it just stayed with them, and it never helped them change, and it became a burden for them that they carried for the rest of their lives. So that's the fear of modern day parents, is that we're going to do something that hurts our child's feelings and they never recover from it.
But this is not
You know?
a child. This girl is 50 years old. And I am taking her to meet all her other relatives that she doesn't know.
Right.
I'm the one that's embarrassed.
Sure.
Because I'm
Well,
raising that girl.
the age of independence keeps moving further and further along. You know, it used to be, by the time you're 16, you're out of the house and you're married and you are working, full time, and you're having kids, and then it moves on. Now, I think it's closer to the age of 30 that you have people that are getting married and getting on their own and all that, and even adult children living with parents is much more common today. So there's this. We're extending childhood further and further along than what we did before. Again, it's a pendulum swinging. We're probably going to realize sooner or later that this is not healthy for us. There is still tough love. There is still your feelings do matter, but on the other hand, maybe your feelings don't matter as much as you think they do. Feelings are just feelings. They're not killing you. You're going to be fine. So there is kind of this, I think we are living with much more childish generations of people today than we did previously. We're acting more childlike. We are not taking as much responsibility. We are not, we're not viewing the hardships of life as a positive thing. We're viewing it as some negative thing to be afraid of or to be shielded from, So, and just to speak directly about the weight issue, this is something that's also just culturally changed recently, where they use the word fat shaming. Fat shaming is something that we're not supposed to do. We're supposed to allow someone to be whatever size they want to be, and that's okay. And probably a big reason for this is that in American society, we have become one of the least healthy and most overweight cultures and generations that's ever existed. It's gotten to the place where it's kind of ridiculous that we're not considering it to be a problem, but carrying around too much weight really will reduce.
Well, I'm talking about health problems.
It will reduce your longevity. It will reduce your number of years that you live because it's associated with so many other health problems. One of the things that has changed is that I think back in the day it was easier to stay thin for a few reasons. One is you didn't have all the junk food that is available today. If you go into the grocery store and if you look for something that's healthy, it's going to be 2% of what they sell, You know, most of what is sold in the store today, it will make you fat. It's just not good. And so the food industry has become another drug that just feeds people and makes money off them, but doesn't really care about the consequences. So that's something that these generations have to deal with that previous generations didn't have to deal with. The other thing that has contributed to that is we have become a culture of convenience more and more so with each generation. So we don't have to physically work hard in order to have a job and make money to live. Previous generations, you had to physically work hard. And so jobs have changed to where it's real easy to find a job where you just sit in a seat all day. So if you're living your life where you sleep at night in a bed and then you wake up and you sit in a chair all day, that's going to contribute to your health problems too. So we do have to be aware that this generation is facing challenges that previous generations didn't have to. And what happens is your body acclimates to the routines and the foods and what it's used to. And so once your body kind of resets to a new, like your brain thinks you're supposed to weigh a certain amount. Once you weigh that amount for long enough, that's what your brain thinks is your healthy weight. So when you try to lose weight, your body and your brain freaks out and is like, no, we're starving. And so a person has to go through that in order to. So I'm saying all of that just to say, as we're very used to what we were used to. When we encounter situations in life, we default to the way that we grew up. And we grew up to our perspective that we grew up with. As times change, circumstances change, expectations change, and people are viewing life through different lenses. So it's always challenging from one generation to the next to see how they face life in a different way. This conversation that you've had with your family, that's probably not a conversation that your parents had with their kids or your grandparents had with their kids, because they were completely different issues that they were facing. They probably still argued, but it was different topics of argument, I never give a simple, easy answer to a statement.
No, but in depth, that's great.
Okay.
All right, yeah.
So this, we can bring that conversation into what we're talking about here.
That's why I was saying some of these words.
This is a new way of thinking for Peter and Cornelius, especially for Peter. It's a new way of thinking about God. It's a new way of thinking about the chosen people of God. And
they don't mean fear him the way we think of fear.
Well, I was wondering
Right.
about the translation. When they translate, did they change it?
it's probably, so there's two things happening. One is word choice. When we're translating something into English, we have to make a decision and pick the word that best fits the original, right? So it's very possible that the word fear is the best English word for what they said. That is possible. That's something that we have to consider. Did the word mean the same thing? But something else we have to think about is the topic of fear itself. I think in previous generations was considered to be a normal way to think about God. And there was nothing wrong with that. To be terrified of God was okay.
Because in the old days, if you walked on holy ground, you were dead.
Right,
You know?
right. But also in the old days, life expectancy was very short, and there were more dangers of killing you than we have today. So for example, if you got pneumonia generations before, you're dead. That's it. So if you if a wild animal gets you, if you move to the United States when it was the New World and people were just exploring, there's a good chance a bear or a mountain lion or there was a good chance you could die. If you think about either living in Florida or Michigan before heating and air, all right? If you were going to live down here with no respite from the heat, or if you were to live in Michigan with no respite from the cold, you could easily die, right? So I think people lived in fear in previous generations, but they really didn't know any better. That's just the way life was. We've gotten to the place where we understand life in deeper ways than previous generations did. We understand germ theory. We understand bacterias and viruses. Peter's generation, they didn't know what was going on, so they just called it demons. Somebody got a demon and they died. And we might say somebody got the flu, And so the life was harder, life was scarier. That's just the way it was. So for them, God reflects that. So if life is scary and life is short and life is hard, so is God. Today, we live in relative comfort. If you're smart enough, you can figure out how to live a life however you want. So a God of fear doesn't fit that. It doesn't fit the way we see life. If somebody is a person who is to be feared is a bad person. If we think of
the word God.
No, yeah. If we think of a scary person, it's not positive. A scary person is like somebody who is in the mafia, or it's some dictator in another country that's killing people who oppose him politically. Those are the things to be feared when we think of people. So culturally speaking, fear was a different thing back then, and today it is. So there's the word choice, and then there's the cultural understanding of fear. So if we're to kind of change this idea of fear into something that works for us today, we would say, if I say I'm afraid of God, I would say I am
In awe.
I'm in awe of God. I have the deepest of respect for God because I realize how much of an impact God can make, not only on my life today, but on my life. God can give and take my life. God can decide if I exist or not. My existence is in God's hands. And if we're honest, that's a little scary. Now, later on, we learn through Jesus and through other revelations of God that God is also the source of love, and that the thing that we cherish the most about life, love itself, comes from God as well. So we have both with God. We use the analogy of the Father or the parent to help us in our relationship with God, but those metaphors have limitations because God really is not a person. We only relate to God as a person because that's the only thing we know to do. We are limited by our understanding of life as a person. And so if we understand God is beyond that, that also means it's a little scary to think that God is beyond what we can understand. It's scary to think it's good for me to trust God, right? And we're encouraged to do it. But also, I don't have any other choice. What am I going to do? You know, I'm going to argue with God about whether I should trust God or not. I mean, if God really is who we think God is, I don't really have a choice. And I believe God is reaching out to me with love and is opening this relationship to me and inviting me to join. And so I'm grateful for that, and I accept that, and I try to live my life in acceptance of that. But I also have to remember, God didn't have to do it. God's not dependent on me. You know?
Just praise the Lord.
when we look at so Carl Sagan did this show, The Cosmos, back in like the 80s or 90s on PBS, and he had a calendar of existence, or a calendar of the universe, right? And he mapped out if the age of the universe was a calendar, then we as human beings are basically living in the last few seconds of the year. All right? So if the cosmos is 14 billion years old, and humans have been around for 120,000 years, humans have only been in human history, where we're recording in writing and human history, what we really know about humans is like 5,000 years old. So we're only living in the last few seconds of a year, if metaphorically the age of the universe is a year, right? And what that does is it tells us we're just this little blink. We're this little blink, and God created the universe. And there may be multiple universes, who knows? So who are we to God? And, this is also something that we see in the Bible. This is the conclusion of the story with Job and God. Job ends up apologizing to God, not because he did anything wrong, but because if he really knew who God was, he would not have been having the argument he did in the first place. He has an argument for the whole book of Job. The whole book is an argument that Job started, right? Job started it. Now we say, but Job had everything taken from him. It's like, well, this is a story about how even when the worst things happen, it doesn't change the reality that God created all this. And so it's all up to God anyway. And so we can question it, but it's really ridiculous for us to question what God is up to. God does not shame Job or tell Job, well, not only am I going to take all this stuff from you, now I'm going to take your life. No, we see God still keeps talking to him. He's still in a relationship with him. But at the end of the day, Job is like, God, I forgot how big you were. I should not have even questioned. Maybe Job would say with today's terms, when I lost everything, I lost my mind. And I was not myself. And I apologize. I have to trust in you. So this fear this idea of fear, we can't totally throw it out, because we still need to have something that reminds us God is not, the opposite of fear would be familiarity. And this, if we think about, there's a story of Jesus, and it's toward the beginning of his ministry. He goes back home to Nazareth, and he goes to preach. Now this is God incarnate, comes to earth, goes back home where he grew up, talks to his people, and they don't accept that he's anybody special. And so what he says is, it's familiarity that breeds contempt. And it is familiarity that makes you not see who I really am. And so this is something that we also have to be careful of when we are looking at this idea of fear. And that is, if we replace it with familiarity and make God more of an equal and make God more relatable and understandable, we end up putting God into this tiny little box. And then God ends up being somebody that we kind of push around. And so we can't get rid of fear altogether. On the other hand, we do not need to think that God is an abusive, mean, horrible parent, because that's not the truth. God is not mean just to be mean. You know, if God does something that we don't like or that's painful for us, we still need to trust. And we don't automatically switch into the mentality, oh, well, then God must be an abusive and emotionally unstable and psychologically depraved person. You know? If God was a psychopath, we should fear God.
Yeah.
Right? But God is not a psychopath. Right? All right. So this is a big, I came across another conversation that I was listening to online that was on the same topic recently. And so it is a really a relevant topic for Christians today. And so this is basically saying, we're in verse 35, in every people, anyone who fears God. So there is this acknowledgement of the existence of God, and there is the proper first response to who God is to be in awe of God. If there is something behind all of this reality that we're living in and brought us into existence, we should have the deepest respect for that source of our existence and of everything around us. So if we have that, that will give us an opening to a relationship with God. And then it says, you fear him and practice righteousness. So these are two things that have to go hand in hand. Understanding and fearing God in the right way, and then practicing righteousness. That means doing the right thing. That means living a moral life. That means being an ethical person, right? If you understand the character of God, you will be a good person. You'll be motivated to be a good person. If you think God is a psychopath, you may end up being a psychopath, right? But if you think God is a good person, a good source, a loving source, then you will automatically want to be the best version of yourself possible. So if you fear God and practice righteousness, if you do those things, you're in. You are ready for a relationship with God. If you fail on either one of those, let's say I do the right thing, but I don't really believe in that nonsense about the source of life. I'm actually the one that determines what's right and wrong. And if I think I'm the center of morality and ethics and goodness, then that's going to end up being a bad thing for me, because I end up becoming the center of the universe. And I will ultimately, likely, make a right and wrong about what is good for me. On the other hand, if I just fear God but don't do the right thing, then probably what that means is you probably have a misunderstanding of who God is and what God is all about. Because if you really knew what God was all about, you would want to do the right thing. So these are the two things that are saying, like, anybody can do this. Anybody. You don't have to be from the Jewish people. You don't have to have a certain DNA. You don't have to be a particular group of people. All right. We probably are not going to make it more than like 1 or 2 verses today. All right. That's okay. It makes no difference who you are or where you're from. If you want God and are ready to do as He says, the door is open. See how different that is? Look at how different that is of a translation. This says, if you fear God and practice righteousness, you're acceptable to Him. If you fear God and practice righteousness, you're acceptable to Him. Here's the other translation. If you want God and are ready to do as He says, the door is open. See? So this is a good example of how a modern day translation tries to address the topic of fear. So instead of saying anybody who fears God, it says if you want God. All right? So to fear God, this is like our first inclination when it comes to the possibility that God exists. Is it to fear God in the old, or the way that we've talked about is an okay way to think about it? Another way to say it is if you realize God exists and you want a relationship with God. That's your first response. If there's a source of life, I want to connect to that. I want to be in tune with that. I want to know what that's all about. If you want God and ready to do as He says, that's the same as practice righteousness. Ready to do what God wants, then the door's open. This is a really important text that's used a lot in Christian teaching. And so it's good for us to realize, look how different those translations are. They're so different. But the reason they're so different is because they're really talking about something pretty deep, and our cultural understanding of reality makes a difference on how we read it. The message He sent to the children of Israel, that through Jesus Christ, everything is being put together again. Well, He's doing it everywhere, among everyone. All right, so here's the other key. You start with fear God or want God, doing right, doing what God wants. That's your doorway into a relationship with God. And then the next revelation is through Jesus, something is happening. And so here we see, this is how it's translated. Oops. You know the message He sent to the people of Israel, preaching peace by Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. Now notice we don't have that phrase, Lord of all. But it says, through Jesus Christ, everything is being put together again. He's doing it everywhere, among everyone. So, preaching peace. It's funny because when you read that in English, that sounds like a small phrase that's not that big of a deal. He preaches peace. Well, we should all get along. That's not exactly what it means. If we look at this word peace, it's very possible this is from the Hebrew word shalom, and that peace means wholeness. And so if Jesus is preaching wholeness, then we could say everything is being put back together again. That's what wholeness is. All right? So to preach peace means there's conflict, and then we bring together harmony. From conflict and chaos to harmony. But another way to view it is, if we're viewing it in the words of wholeness, it's chaos and brokenness, and Jesus is bringing it together for healing and wholeness. So another thing where word choice is important, and kind of knowing the background of the text here. So it's this acknowledgement of God, and then it is through Jesus, everything in this life that seems to be chaotic or broken is being fixed through Jesus. That's the other part of the good news. So Cornelius is going to be like, okay, through Jesus, tell me about that. Because he already fears God, and he already does what's right. He's already got that part down. So he's like anybody else. That's a great introduction. That starts your relationship with God. So now we're saying, okay, let's go a little bit deeper and let's see how God makes life better, how God makes life move according to this ultimate purpose of goodness that he has, and how he does that through Jesus. That's going to be the missing piece for Cornelius. And all right, so we'll just read a few more verses here, so at least we can feel like we moved ahead. You know the story of what happened in Judea. It began in Galilee after John preached a total life change. This is John the Baptist. Then Jesus arrived from Nazareth, anointed by God with the Holy Spirit, ready for action. He went through the country helping people and healing everyone who was beaten down by the devil. He was able to do all this because God was with him. All right? So what we see here is a little bit more about who Jesus is. Jesus comes to Nazareth. He comes after John the Baptist. So we're having like a little context here of who Jesus is. And then it's telling us that he did these miraculous things, right? He helped people and he healed people. And he did this because God was with him. So this is the introduction to Jesus. And we saw it all, everything he did in the land of the Jews and in Jerusalem, where they killed him, hung him from a cross. But in 3 days, God had him up alive and out where he could be seen. Not everyone saw him. He wasn't put on public display. Witness had been carefully handpicked by God beforehand, us. We were the ones who were to eat and drink with him after he came back from the dead. He commissioned us to announce this in public and to bear solemn witness that he is in fact the one whom God destined as judge of the living and the dead. But we're not alone in this. Our witness is that he is the means for forgiveness of sins, is backed up by the witness of all the prophets. So this gets deeper into who Jesus is. He did good things. He was called by God, and then he was killed. But because God was with him, he rose again. He appeared to the people that God chose for him to appear to. And then those people were asked to spread this good news. And the good news is centered on this idea of forgiveness. So this is, according to Peter in this description of Jesus, one of the primary things that Jesus does is brings us into this idea of forgiveness being central to what God is doing in this world. If we're going to understand what God is doing in this world, we understand forgiveness. Now that's an interesting what's the word? Practice. It's an interesting practice to be at the center of everything. You would think forgiveness is this optional thing on the side, that maybe we do it, maybe we don't. But this is telling us that forgiveness is central to everything that God is doing in this life. So
it's one of the primary things that God wants people to do
Yes.
is forgiveness.
Yes. To give forgiveness and to receive forgiveness.
Okay.
Yep. And it is forgiveness with one another, and it is forgiveness between us and God. And that's one of the ways that we understand the importance of what Jesus brought into the picture as being most important.
Well, we know that God forgives us, but people in our world, they don't know that, and they don't give forgiveness.
Right. It's kind of like what we were talking about before. There's an older way of parenting that is kind of like do what I say, not what I do. Right?
Okay.
So if we think of God in that way of parenting, we misunderstand God. And some of it, and we can get caught up in that, to think that God is telling us to do something that God is not doing himself, right? But the example of Jesus' life tells us that not only is God asking us to forgive, but God is actively forgiving in our own experience of him. Yeah, and forgiveness is multifaceted. It's really, it's something that helps us to move on in life and not get weighed down by disappointments and anger and unrealized expectations, all of those things. With forgiveness, we can say, you know what? It's okay. It's okay. I'm going to let it go. And
Because it's not gonna.
easier said than done.
Yeah.
The man that dropped the atom bomb, 175,000 people he killed. And he knew what he was going to do. And you think he was a good man. How does he live with himself? How could he possibly forgive himself?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah, that's huge. All right, let us wrap up with our song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And we are going to, let's do verse 3. And we'll just do that one verse while we close. Are we weak and heavy laden, cumbered with a load of care? Precious Savior, still our refuge. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Do thy friends despise, forsake thee? Take it to the Lord in prayer. In his arms he'll take and shield thee. Thou wilt find a solace there.